Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslak talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk about whether PhD students should have a website. So if you don't know me, I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. So I started this sort of sharing economy proofreading platform, which is the whole reciprocity thing. And then to get the word out, I started doing these YouTube videos about this particular platform because I think it's really fun and interesting. And yeah, anyways, so should you as PhD students have a website? So to be honest, I don't think it actually matters a terrible amount whether you actually have a website or not as a PhD student. So I created one years ago when I was doing my PhD. I thought it would have some sort of impact or something like that, but generally does not have that much of an impact. The reason is because people have to search for you, and if they're going to search for you, it's because they have their CV in front of you or have a particular paper in front of you. So having a web presence as a PhD student doesn't necessarily benefit you a terrible amount in terms of your academic career, if that's the thing that you're doing it for. And I don't think it's going to impact your industry career at all because you're going to be sending in different resumes and stuff like that to industry if you're going into the industry route. However, in terms of the academic route, it really doesn't matter. People just kind of generally know who you are anyways. So, but there's a couple of caveats that I want to point out in terms of thinking about this, right? So the first thing is the reason why I don't recommend it is simply because it consumes time, and then search engines and all that kind of stuff, they're going to not necessarily give you a lot of traction on your particular website if you don't have a lot of content on it. So if you don't know this is how the web works. You have to produce a tremendous amount of content before search engines even take a look at what your website is doing before it'll rank on any before it ranks on any search engine, right? So, and that's just kind of really what happens. It takes months and months and months to get anything to rank. And then you also need a tremendous amount of content for anything to rank as well. So you have to have a large amount of mass of content being like written material, maybe it's videos, whatever it is. It has to have a lot of stuff that's sitting there before anything will work, right? Before you'll even get picked up on search engine. It'll only work. It will work if they Google or they search Yahoo, I guess is the verb that you could use to. If they search the exact term, so your exact name, and then it'll pop up, your website will pop up. But anything other than that, any of the content on there, it's just not going to matter that much. However, there's a couple of caveats here, and so the one thing I wanted to point out is I've never really met a single PhD that was ever hired because of the website that they actually had, or because of their CV. It's not really that big of a thing, and sometimes it actually could be a liability for you if you're spending a large amount of time. And this is one thing I terribly worry about with this whole reciprocity project is the sort of liability behind it. If you're working a tremendous amount on something like this that is not sort of it's not directly like writing papers and stuff like that. Sometimes some people will view that as a negative thing, right? And you should be focusing on writing papers. It's just the way it is, and people are going to be really focused on that, whether you're actually doing that particular, whether you're writing papers versus doing all these sort of secondary things that are not necessarily that important. I mean, so I do see value in it because this is kind of the way that the economy works nowadays, is that there is all a tremendous amount of promotion that happens besides like your actual content that you're producing, or the actual research that you're producing. But if you're doing research, then it's automatically going to be driving sort of promotion for you because it's really good and really interesting. So, and the other thing I want to point out, it varies significantly between the areas of what the sort of web presence that you have and the area that you're on. So some fields have really taken off with this, and I have no idea why some have and why some haven't. It's just kind of, I think it's historic artifacts, to be honest. So economics is really big into blogs and, having these large blogs. So there's a number of people out there that have made a significant impact on blogging and sort of having a web presence because that they're, an economist doing sort of web blogging thing. And really what it is they're providing some commentary, some in-depth commentary about particular issues, whatever it might be, and they dig deep into those particular issues. A couple of ones that have become more popular are, focused on doing sort of methodological things and talking about methodological things. So I think there's a couple on sort of reproducing results in sort of scientific literatures and stuff like that pop up. I can't quite remember the names of them, but you can look them up, just Google them, and they become substantial. Like, people have become somewhat famous because of these blogs, because of that, and because they have become a substantial sort of asset. But I don't know if a lot of people, for the amount of people that actually do get that sort of notoriety from, or the sort of fame from those blogs, there's 100 other people that have tried that and it doesn't necessarily work, right? So the better way is actually just doing research publications and getting that. Another thing that you should also think about in terms of whether you're going to do this, it's not only just depends on the area that you're doing, but as well as thinking about the type of website that you're actually going to produce. So if it's just kind of like another CV, putting up your resume kind of thing on a website, it's just really not worth your time to go through all that effort to do all that kind of stuff. The other kind of, or if it's just kind of like commentary on your travels and things like that, or even just kind of what's going on in the research world, it's not really going to do that much good, and it's not going to benefit you tremendously unless for some reason you're exceptionally gifted in writing and you become very lucky and that your blog takes off, right? So that sort of standard bloggy kind of stuff is not necessarily all that effective. What I've seen is highly effective is when people create sort of tools and suites of tools, and then they actually become very used a lot, right? So for example, maybe you have Stata tools or R tools or something like that, and you start building a library. And the way that you build a library is you put it online, you put it on your website, and maybe you have things like, doing data or analysis, for example, different kinds of plots, or you find some interesting way of doing something, and then you put it on your website of this new kind of technique of doing sort of data analysis and stuff like that, and that becomes extremely valuable, and that actually is very, very useful. And so you have to balance what kind you're going to do, right? So these sort of really helpful videos or helpful. So I use YouTube videos a fair bit now. Lots of users are starting to do that in terms of Stata and R. And so Stata, if you don't know, the statistical software. R is another statistical software, but it is entirely, I believe it's entirely open source. Stata is kind of in between. It's kind of a weird one that there is the private source code is owned by a company, Stata Corp, and then lots of people provide sort of open source software for that, or sort of things that you can plug into that. And so users will create their own sort of software and plug that into that. So there's a tremendous amount of research that would show this in sort of user innovation literature, that this is actually beneficial to do this kind of stuff in terms of benefiting you in terms of reputation, for example, and things like that. And another thing, especially if you're doing sort of instructional things, it's really useful to see these kind of instructional things if it's in great detail and you do a really good job of explaining things like that, right? So there's some really great research that's come out by Paul Leonardi, and he's done some at USCB or UCSB, and he's done some really cool research that showed that it's, people sort of use these kind of websites in when they're using them, they don't necessarily sort of use them as like, okay, I'm going to follow these things all the time, and this is going to be a big thing that I'm going to go to these websites, but they provide a useful resource later on. They might find something and they're like, that's really cool. And then they go back to that resource later on as kind of like a memory tool. And you keep coming back to that. It's the same thing if you're going to be active. And I would put sort of presence or websites and stuff like that in with social media. Social media is even worse because it's just so fleeting. It just disappears overnight as soon as you sort of put comments and stuff like that. So you can spend a lot of time on social media and in all of your efforts and stuff like that to build a reputation. Just it's a treadmill, right? Like you're just going to be doing this sort of treadmill thing on a regular basis. So the social media thing can be helpful um, if you are interacting on a regular basis in terms of getting jobs and positions like that, because you become sort of recognized in that area, but it takes a tremendous amount of work. And I just don't think the work is sort of worth putting in, like a lot of work putting into developing a social media presence compared to doing like a website that is just really helpful or something along those lines, or just focusing on your research. You're going to benefit a lot more by doing that than doing these sort of web things. So what I would recommend for you in terms of doing a PhD website, and if you're a PhD student doing a website, so first of all, first thing is I just wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. There is a lot of different tools to put your website or put your resume online and to make it available. So the two that are becoming big, and lots of people are using them now. So up until about 2 years ago, this was not recognized that much, but ResearchGate. If you're using ResearchGate, lots of people use this now. Pretty much every researcher I know is on it. There's only a small handful of people that are doing it. It's kind of a startup thing. I think the guy was from Germany that started it and kept putting his efforts into it and developed this thing a little bit further. And now it's actually a legitimate sort of tool. And then the other one is Google Scholar. That would rival that. So you can put a lot of stuff on Google Scholar and put a lot of details on there. And it's going to stay up there. People search Google Scholar all the time and look at that. The nice thing is it kind of does all of the stuff for you that you want to do anyways. So I'd recommend those tools instead of wasting or spending a lot of time, not wasting, but spending a lot of time on sort of social media stuff or doing a sort of generic, CV website thing. The problem is with doing that, the website thing is you have to continuously keep producing content on it and pushing stuff out, and it just gets really overwhelming. If you do want to do a website of some sort and sort of focus on that, I would just try to focus on doing, making helpful tools and sort of helpful sort of guidelines or guides and things like that, and sort of just making a repository of some sort that will be searchable later on, that people could come back and say, you know what, I saw this thing and I wish I could do this. There's a couple of really useful people. There's there's probably about 100 sort of people that are amazing in Stata. And they are, and same with R as well. Like they are kind of go-to people, and that they do help out the research community a lot, and they, and it really helps out their reputation in terms of academic reputation. That if they are doing this sort of helpful things on a regular basis. And all of that stuff, that Stata has a sort of forum. I think R has forums as well. I just don't use R, so I don't know it as much. So R has forums. It's just because, and by the way, the sort of tools that happen are historical artifacts. When you become good at something, then you just don't switch to something else. I used to use C++, and I used to use MATLAB and all that kind of stuff. But Stata was, at the time when I was going through my academic training, that's what people used. So I used that instead of C++ and MATLAB. I'd probably use going back, I probably would have stuck with MATLAB. It's actually pretty good. Or, those kind of things. The sort of more the things that are used in scientific areas a little bit more. And the only thing with Stata, and I'm digressing, Stata is really focused for sort of econometric kind of stuff, so it's kind of handy. But anyways, so if you have tools that sort of help out with those kind of areas, that is really useful to put that on a website. And even if you have a couple, it's searchable, and it does get searched. It does pop up, and I've seen lots of different websites where there's just a couple of tools or typical kind of guidelines and sort of guides and stuff like that they have on the website, and it pops up. And I'm like, that person is really cool, and they're doing this, and thank you so much, kind of thing, right? Like, and it sort of sticks in my mind that they're pretty useful people. Um, if you are really interested in doing sort of a website for your PhD, I wouldn't focus sort of your main efforts throughout the day doing that. What I would do, and because it just takes a lot of time, as you can see with doing these YouTube videos, it does take a lot of time if I would have known. But anyways, yeah, I love it, but at the same time, it does consume a lot of time. So if I was you, I would prioritize doing research first. And then after that, like at night when you're tired and you're still wanting to do this and you want to do something like maybe make a blog about, the best donuts in town. I've always wanted to make a blog about the best burgers. If somebody did that and they just went around and just ate the best burgers, maybe it's Burgers and Academics or something, where they just go every conference they go to and they just had the best burgers and they sort of wrote down what are the best ones. I mean, I would totally read that. That'd be awesome, right? And anyways, if you had things like that, then and you're doing it kind of as a relaxing thing, and that's what I do. I putting out these blog posts on reciprocity. I just been doing it. It's kind of like relaxing at night, just before I go to bed. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but at the same time, what else am I going to do? Watch more TV? I don't know. So, anyways, just before bed, if that's the thing that you're doing to sort of relax and wind down, that's great, right? Like that's helpful. So that's all I want to talk about. That's what I would sort of do in terms of, if you're a PhD student, you're thinking about creating a website. I, if you're just doing it, just put your resume and CV and stuff like that on there. Don't do it. It's not worth your time. If you're doing it to build a sort of repository of tools and useful things, that could be actually really useful and it could be very beneficial for a lot of people out there. So you can check that out and you would probably do that. So, and then finally, prioritize your research first. That's the biggest thing. So that's it. Hopefully that you enjoy this video. Take care and give me a thumbs up and if you like it and do subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, bye.